Brought to you by the first ever Toyota Grand Highlander. Hello, friends. Jack, Flight School O'Brien here, also known as Jack. Still can touch net if I get a running start and haven't eaten heavy breakfast. O'Brien, both nicknames that I go by. Inviting you to check out Miles and Jack Got Mad Boosties for a weekly basketball conversation with me and my co-host from the Daily Zeitgeist, Miles Gray. We are joined by comedians, writers, podcasters, and fellow NBA fans as we discuss the latest news and events from around the league. Check it out. Miles and Jack Got Mad Boosties. Brought to you by the first ever Toyota Grand Highlander.
Hi, it's Gabby Reese, and this podcast is powered by Laird Superfood. It was created in our kitchen by my husband, big wave surfer Laird Hamilton, and it all started with a simple idea. What began as Laird's secret for long-lasting energy on the waves is now Laird Superfood, offering a full range of delicious plant-based creamers, coffee, greens, and more. Visit lairdsuperfood.com and use the code GABBY2024 and save 20% on your first order.
It's time to get inside the Giants huddle.
Let's go!
On Giants.com.
I like it.
And the Giants mobile app.
Boom, give me some juice.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's roll.
Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle Podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmelk, joined now by Eric Eager. Second time he's been with us here on the Giants Huddle Podcast. He is the Vice President of Research and Development at Sumer Sports, which is a consulting company for NFL teams trying to figure out ways to successfully build NFL franchises. And given we're about to head into off-season mode right now, I thought Eric would be a great person to talk to try to figure out what type of moves the Giants might want to make here moving forward to get back into the NFL playoffs, like the teams that'll be participating in the Super Bowl this year, where Eric Eager is in lovely Las Vegas. Eric, what's going on, man? Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, John's great to see you, and it's I can't believe we're already through the season, man.
I know, it goes fast. I just came back from Frisco and Mobile, so I'm already in the off-season mode. For the people fortunate enough to still be in regular season mode, let's start there. What lessons did you and your group over there at Sumer Sports take out of not just the two Super Bowl teams, but the Final Four and the Final Eight from this year's playoff teams in terms of team building?
Yeah, I think when you look at, right now we have the basically since 2012, right? We have another Super Bowl, all of them since 2000, except for 2016. We have all the Super Bowls except for one have had a team built around a quarterback who is making rookie deal money. So, with the exception of Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, it's just incredibly hard to win in the NFL when your quarterback makes a lot of money. And I think, when you look at the Giants, Daniel Jones played, I think, really good football in 2022. 2023, they played a tougher schedule. A lot of things came, I think, to a head as far as the roster maturity and, people catching up a little bit to the scheme. And so, I think a question for them becomes, how do you look at the Kansas City Chiefs with a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, first ever quarterback in the history of the league to have the biggest cap hit, also make the Super Bowl? How do you look at their approach to team building and say, how can we build the second best defense in the NFL? How can we build an offensive line that is able to, have Patrick Mahomes generate the second lowest sack rate in the NFL behind just Josh Allen? And how can you deal and how can you live with the tensions that arise from weaknesses in the roster? The Chiefs have one of the worst receiving corps in the NFL, only one wide receiver with over 500 yards this year, and no wide receivers with over 1,000. A lot of those same issues the Giants grapple with, and yet, for them it becomes, I think, catastrophic at times because, they don't have, the quarterback that's, the quarterback's a six or 7 out of 10, and maybe not a 10 out of 10 the way Mahomes is. How can Dable, how can Daniel Jones come together to squeeze a little bit more juice out of the orange? And how can they, how can they as a front office go in and, get the 4 or 5 more, talented players that can elevate the play and the coaching of the most important people on the roster?
All right, you hit a lot of good topics there. I want to hit on one at a time here. So one, do you still think more important for teams to focus on offense rather than defense? Since maybe one great offensive player like a quarterback can sustain you for a longer period of time, where do you lean that way in terms of what has a better chance of getting you to where you want to go? A really good offense or a really good defense, and then sustaining that over a longer period of time?
Well, really good offense is just easier to build because it takes fewer degrees of freedom, right? So, oftentimes, the data says that quarterbacks control a lot more of their pressure rate than offensive line do. Patrick Mahomes, for example, I mentioned that pressure rate and the sack rate. That offensive line has gotten worse this year. They gave up 1% more pressure because Jawan Taylor led the league in penalties, but was also, a very, giving player at the right side of the offensive line as a free agent over from Jacksonville. Donovan Smith, was injured for a lot of times. They were starting a third-round rookie at left tackle and Wanya Morris for part of the season. But the quarterback's able to overcome that. At wide receiver, they really struggled. Rashee Rice eventually emerged and had more receiving yards than any rookie in Andy Reid's career. But Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Sky Moore, a lot of guys that the Chiefs really wanted to be better players didn't, and they were still able to sort of overcome it sometimes. On defense, it takes a concerted effort because it's such a 11-player deal, right? One of the craziest stats is the Chiefs have drafted 8 contributors for their defense the last 3 drafts, 6 of them in 2022 alone, and that's part of the Tyreek Hill trade. But that takes concerted effort and being able to hit on the picks, and so it's just a lot harder to generate defense, and defense is harder to sustain as teams like the Legion of Boom and teams like the Ravens, who next year I think are going to lose Patrick Queen, and they're going to get a year older with guys like Marlon Humphrey, and they're probably going to lose Davion Clowney and things like that. It's just harder to sustain defense, and defense is a lot more sensitive to injuries and players falling off because of age.
Yeah, and to me, Eric, and maybe I'm simplifying this too much, but to me, defense is more of a weakness-based group where if you're good in a couple spots, but if you have one glaring weakness, the other team can target that. It's hard for you to mitigate that, right? Offense, though, I feel like you have more force multipliers where 1 or 2 guys can elevate other groups and you can overcome those weaknesses through your own game planning. Is that fair?
Yeah, because, you don't get to choose in a lot of ways how the offense attacks you. So if you have a weak corner or a weak nickel or a linebacker in coverage, like you really can't dictate to the offense that they don't get to challenge you. Whereas, if you're Kansas City and like your third receiver isn't very good, what Kansas City has done really well in the playoffs is they've gone to more 2 and 3 tight end sets. So they can eliminate that player from the personnel grouping. They can run the football more. They can do that kind of thing. Now, there's limits to that. Of course. You can't run the football on 3rd and 10, but you can eliminate some of those situations that put you in harm's way. Whereas the offense, they can put you in weak spots. So to your point, it's much more of a weak link system. And that's what makes it tough, because it's really hard to buy average. It's really hard to draft average in the NFL. Oftentimes you get to average on accident, right? You draft weaker players and they become average, and that's a good thing. Or you sign elite players and they become average, which is a bad thing. But it's really hard to sort of like call your shot and say, I'm signing an average linebacker. I'm signing an average left tackle. I've never seen an average left tackle in free agency. Because those players are actually incredibly valuable, the same way that starting pitching is incredibly valuable. Even an average starting pitcher in baseball is going to be worth 15 to 20 million in the free agency market. So that's, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And that's why, to your point, you're looking for force multipliers. And oftentimes on offense, it's so much easier to find those players.
Now, I'll say the one exception to that on offense, and I'd love to see if you disagree with me, is the offensive line, right? Because as an offensive group, you can't control how the defense is going to attack your offensive line, right? And much like defense, you could have 3 really good all-pro level players, but if your right tackle stinks, guess what? And your left guard's awful, you could probably only help on one side to mitigate one of those weaknesses, right? So as the Giants continue, as they've been for what seems like 15 years, trying to, more like 10, build out that offensive line and make it a better group, what's the best way to approach that? Are you looking for the elite player, Eric? Are you looking to spread those resources out to just get a bunch of guys that are okay and average, but not bad? How do you best allocate those resources to finally build an offensive line that can protect Daniel Jones and help run the ball at Saquon Barkley and whatever else the Giants want to do offensively?
Well, luckily, history has a really good guide for us because, tackles are premium position players. And usually those tackles, you have exceptions like David Bakhtiari and guys like that. But for the most part, and Giants fans know this, if you want to get an elite tackle, you generally speaking have to take them really high. And that doesn't mean you're going to get one. Sometimes they're Evan Neal and sometimes they're Andrew Thomas. But you have to take elite tackles high. Guards, you can sign them in free agency. When you look at, the free agency market this year with guards has plenty of talented players. And, in free agency, generally speaking, you're able to sign guards and centers and linebackers and nickel corners and safeties and fullbacks and tight ends and slot receivers and running backs. If you want to get a tackle, you got to take them high in the draft generally. And you can take in Philadelphia, Jordan Mailata was a guy that emerged, but that was because he was a hedge on Andre Dillard, who was a top end pick. So that's kind of where you go. If you have weaknesses at guard and center, you generally speaking can go out in free agency and pay up a little bit to get them. They're not that expensive and they're accessible. If you have a weakness at tackle, like for the most part, you either have to go back into the draft and draft them, or you have to go and trade for one of them, a la Dwayne Brown or Trent Williams or something like that. And you really have to wrestle them away from the teams that have found gold there. And that can be typical.
Agree with you 100%. And the Giants, I think, are in a position here to target center, or not center. They drafted John Michael Schmitz, but guard certainly in free agency this year, where they've had some issues the last couple of years. And then we'll see about tackle at the top of the draft, which is going to come down to a decision, right? And we all remember the Bengals' decision a couple years ago. Well, do you draft Penei Sewell or do you draft Jamar Chase? The Giants could be staring that type of decision right in the face this year if they have Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Olu Fashanu, Joe Alt, putting aside the quality of the players, assuming they all have similar grades, eye of the beholder, all that stuff. Where should a team go? Because to your point, you can't find elite offensive tackles in free agency. They never get there. Well, it's the same for 1A wide receivers now, right? These guys don't hit free agency. If you want to get one, maybe you can trade for one, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, but you can't sign one. So in terms of ultimate value, where do you see that? Wide receiver now, elite wide receiver versus elite tackle?
I think it really depends upon what your internals say about Evan Neal, right? Because Andrew Thomas as a rookie was not very good. And, we've seen over and over and over again, offense, like that's the toughest position in football. You think about Danielle Hunter, you think about you think about these Adonises that play defensive end in the league, and you think about the athletic mismatch between tackle in the NFL and defensive end. And when you look at age curves, offensive line have the longest age curves, right? It takes forever for them to actually peak. And so, in my opinion, it's all coming down to, do you think Evan Neal's first 2 years are indicative of who he is? Or do you think it's 1 year more than Andrew Thomas, which is Andrew Thomas struggled in year one, really good in year two, and now is a cornerstone of this franchise, deserving of the long-term deal. If Evan Neal is a guy that can actually play for you, then you make the bet on one of the wide receivers, because, ultimately, it's, you're going to end up moving Neal to guard or something like that if you take a tackle in the first round. And one of those tackles is going to play right tackle, which is not, it might be a position change for one of them if you end up with one. Yeah. So I think that Neal is probably the guy you want to go with, and you want to draft a wide receiver and just say, look, Daniel Jones, you're going to have to be a quicker processor. You're going to have to get the ball out of your hands faster as Evan Neal grows into this position. And that, to me, is probably the best gamble. But if they internally don't believe Evan Neal is going to figure the thing out, then you have to cut bait on it. And even though he was a high draft pick, there's value, of course. Robert Gallery, for example, was a pretty good guard in the NFL, even though he was a high draft pick as a tackle and never worked out there. And that could always be the case. And Neal you can get 2 years of him as a plus player at guard, while you break in another rookie offensive tackle with a top 10 pick. But it all depends upon what your grades are of him, in my opinion.
As you advise these teams, how much do you take into consideration the fact that these wide receiver classes are now so deep that you have a better shot at finding a really good wide receiver with a Giants pick at the top round? Two, heck, maybe you could even package their second round pick they got for Leonard Williams to move back up into the first. However you want to do it, that you have a better chance of finding that wide receiver that could become a true one wide receiver with a early second round, late first round pick, versus, to your point you made earlier, if you're going to get an elite offensive tackle, you better take one in the top 10.
Yeah, and the league doesn't value wide receivers all that much either, right? So if you take a guy at wide receiver in the top 10, you're going against the grain. Even in that big wide receiver draft in 2022, Garrett Wilson was the first guy Drake London was the first guy taken, and he wasn't in the top five. We haven't seen a wide receiver taken in the top five in a long time. Last year, the first one was taken in the 20s with Jackson Smith and Njigba. The league prizes players on the interior because they're just so much, from a physical standpoint, so much more rare, that if you go step out and take a wide receiver high, it's almost always going to be against the grain. So you have to be right about them. Whereas with tackles, you're going to be kind of in step with the market. So I agree with you. And there's almost always, when you look at hit rates on second round wide receivers, they're generally speaking better than market rates. And so it's a pretty good gamble to wait on them. And the other part in the NFL, which is true, and what I really liked about the Jalen Hyatt pick is wide receivers. You think about back in the day for the Giants, Ike Hilliard and Amani Toomer and Hakeem Nicks and guys like that. Those are everything everywhere all at once wide receivers. They do everything. They play in the slot. They play on the outside. They win out. They win short. They win long. Modern NFL wide receiver, they all play a role. Hyatt's the guy that makes sure the defense respects him over the top. Some of the other guys are more slot guys. If you draft a guy in the second round, he can play a role. Rashee Rice for the Chiefs played a role for the first half of the year until he built himself into an every down wide receiver. It also lessens the blow on that player. Whereas if you draft a wide receiver like, Henry Ruggs in the top 10, and all he ends up being for you is a deep threat in year one, that's already a busted pick in some ways because everybody expects that player to be an every down player like a tackle would be early on. So those are considerations to think about. Whereas if a guy's a second round pick, he can be a contributor with a decent set of expectations early on.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day to every day, Citizens is made ready for Giants fans with insights, guidance, and solutions. Learn more at citizensbank.com. Here with Eric Eager from Sumer Sports. Let's stick on offense, Eric, and I'll get to the quarterback position in a second. Tight end. It's funny. I get the argument against the tight end early because you're not getting the financial advantage, right? The tight end salaries are not as big, so you're not saving as much money picking a tight end early. But at the same time, I feel like guys like Travis Kelce are a huge market advantage when you sign them to the extension. So just getting one of those guys, then having an elite player long-term for $14 million a year instead of $28 million for a top wide receiver, that's an advantage too. So how do you view that early tight end pick from a financial perspective? And also remember, you can get tight ends late that are good too.
Yeah, to me, it's almost always the position. It's kind of like offensive line, where if you look at the hits rate of top guys, it's really low because you got to be a lineman type player physically, and you have to be a wide receiver type player from an intelligence standpoint, and that's just hard to square. The funny part, though, as Giants fans will know, those guys almost always the athletes that you draft high, they end up being, they end up having salvageable careers elsewhere. Evan Ingram's a good player for the Jaguars. Njoku was the one guy that everybody gave the Cleveland Browns a lot of flack for signing him to a long-term deal. That's been great. I mean, the Browns were basically like, yeah, the drafting him was the mistake. Not signing him would have been a mistake. So if I'm the Giants and I'm looking for a difference maker at the position, Waller was a good gamble, but I'm looking at, what if the Falcons take a second or third round pick for Kyle Pitts? You've already, right? The league's already evaluated him for better or worse, right? They wanted, before the evaluation, they took him at 4. Now they'll take him at, in the mid 30s, and you get that opportunity fifth year option to get a couple cheap years, but you also get him right before all these other great. You think about Greg Olsen was better for his second team. Asante Shianko, a Giant, was really good with the Vikings after playing behind Jeremy Shockey.
Asante Shianko, good pull, Eric. Good pull.
Yeah, and you think about all of these tight ends, and it's just because that position. Jared Cook was terrible in his first part of his career and really good at the second part. It's just that position is so hard, and so that's the hard part about taking them high. It's not that like Kyle Pitts is a great prospect. It's that the time period in which he has to develop is longer than the rookie deal contract, and so you almost never get. I agree. Like once you get him in the fold and you pay him, T.J. Hawkinson's another one. Once you get him in the fold, he's going to be a value because that market's so suppressed. But the reason it's suppressed is because those rookie deal players don't end up being high performers.
No, that's interesting. All right, let's roll back to quarterback. And you talked about how the quarterback can elevate a lot of issues and problems around them, right? 100% agree. The Giants now are dealing with a quarterback that has a second neck injury and an ACL tear, right? I think both of us believe as of now, one of those top 3 quarterbacks is probably not going to be sitting there at 6 for them to pick. So let's take that out of the equation. And let's just assume one of those 3 teams are not going to want to trade out of those picks, right? So those guys are unavailable. What's the value to you of taking shots on quarterbacks later in the draft? We've seen shots in the dark work, right? Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, go down the list of late round picks, but there's so few of them. And the percentage hit rate is so low. So from your guys' perspective, when you crunch the numbers, what's the value on taking those shots on day 2 and day 3 on quarterbacks? Or even maybe the hit rate's not great, but if you do, the reward is exponential.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, for example. You think about Kirk Cousins in the same draft as RG3. The hit rate sometimes it gets suppressed because the guy that you actually want to be your quarterback ends up working out. So that's another one. I think about Carolina. If you drafted Bryce Young first, you trade a mountain for him, and you end up with, JJ McCarthy, let's say in round 3, do you take him? I say yes, right? Because you just don't know. And the same thing with Daniel Jones. Like I think, rounds 2, maybe not round 2, but 3, 4, and 5. I think you absolutely consider a quarterback just because you just don't know. And the other part, and this is big for these quarterbacks, especially the ones that aren't elite, injuries happen. And I think about the Colts, right? It's fun that Gardner Minshew did great this year, but wouldn't you rather have a guy on a rookie deal that you're trying to figure some things out about play in the stead of Anthony Richardson? If you were the Panthers last year, did you really want Andy Dalton starting that game, or did you want some other guy? I think even for the teams like the Patriots, like the Commanders, now the Commanders have Howell, but the team that's picking first overall, the Bears, they should keep Fields. If they don't keep Fields, they should draft another guy later in the draft because young quarterbacks get hurt. And we've seen with Jones. Jones has gotten hurt in the years that he hasn't played well because part of the position that the Brady's and the Mahomes and the Manning's master is not getting injured. And while Daniel Jones is learning how to read and how to make sure that he can throw the ball in the right place, he's not protecting himself because he's using his brain on other things. And I think for any team that's kind of in limbo quarterback wise, they have to factor in the injury part. I think everybody always thinks about the ineffectiveness part, but the injury part is also a big deal. And one of the reasons why you should hedge your bet with a young quarterback there as well.
Is evaluating quarterbacks and drafting quarterbacks and figuring out which guys are going to be good and which guys are going to be bad, is that still maybe the hardest thing NFL teams have to do when it comes to draft time?
I think so, but I think Giants fans will appreciate this as well. Like I think the college to pro evaluation to me isn't as hard as the first 4-year evaluation, because as Giants fans know, if you get a good coach, which I think Dable is, you get some weapons like Barkley and Slayton and those guys that are around him last year, and you build and you have an easy schedule because if you're picking high, eventually you're going to have an easy schedule because of the way it shakes out. It's not that hard to get 9-10 wins. It's to me the hardest quarterback problem is evaluating what those 9 or 10 wins mean, and that's the hardest problem. The Rams failed at that with Goff. The Eagles failed at that with Wentz. The first 4 years are fine. Usually, it's that do I pay the guy the $40 million after, because that's the real commitment, and that wasn't, and that's a relatively new phenomenon. When the Rams drafted Bradford in 2010, they had to give him $50 million guaranteed right away. So it was the two problems in one, and now those two problems actually happen separately, and that's I think the second one's actually harder than the first one.
Yeah, I mean, say hello Chicago Bears with Justin Fields, right? Say hello Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Baker Mayfield, where they had good years, or rather the Bucs had a good year, and the Bears had some good play from Justin Fields towards the end. And even the Cowboys with Dak Prescott, right? And they're in the division, so let me ask you about that. I'm just curious, how do you think the Cowboys should handle Prescott? Maybe 8th, 9th best quarterback in the league? He's clearly good enough to win you double-digit wins fairly consistently. They haven't had the big success there. He's got a huge cap number. He has a no-trade clause, which complicates things even further. Are they in a trap here where they pretty much have to extend him as they move forward?
Yeah, from a cap perspective, they do, right? Because he has a $60 million hit. You can kind of spread that out a little bit with void years and everything. But if he's going to be your quarterback, you're going to pay for him anyway for the next 5 years in some way, shape, or form. You might as well. I think he's certainly past the threshold of being above the pay threshold, right? He's good enough to make the $50 million a year, the $55 million a year. So they probably have to address it this year to get that cap number down, so that they can address, defensive back. They can address some things in the offensive line. They can worry about wide receiver depth after CeeDee Lamb, which is a problem. They can worry about running back depth after, Pollard. I think they have to do that. If they're not going to, they should consider trading him, because if they're just going to kind of kick the can down the road, that's still going to involve paying Prescott for the next 5 years in some way, shape, or form through void years and prorating bonuses.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New You moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Giant fans love a winner. It's why they love Citizens, named a 2022 Best Bank in the U.S. by The Banker as the official bank of the Giants and sponsor of the Huddle. Citizens is made ready for fans of Big Blue. Learn more at citizensbank.com. Couple more here for Eric Eager over at Sumer Sports. Eric, running back, the Giants will have to make another decision on Saquon Barkley this offseason. They have the franchise tag available to him. You could also do kind of like a short-term, long-term deal, 2 to 3 years if you want. Your thoughts on how they should try to figure out Saquon Barkley this offseason?
I think all the teams that held the water on running backs, the Raiders, the Cowboys, the Giants, were all proven right. None of those players played up to their platform year. And so, as good as Saquon is, I think he means a ton to this team. I think you try to get something done. I don't think paying a running back $10 to $12 million is egregious. I think you have to have a real conversation about what it means for him to be the starting running back on that team. Does it mean all the carries, all the catches? I don't think you can do that anymore. But I think given what he means to the team from a locker room standpoint and everything, they have to evaluate that, because, if he's going to come back and say, I still want to have, and I don't think he actually has, I don't know what he's actually asked for, but if he's going to ask for McCaffrey money, if he's going to ask for Kamara money, that's probably a non-starter. But if he asks for Nick Chubb money, Aaron Jones type of money, and the Giants have a real plan on how to preserve his health, I think it's feasible to work with him there. To me, it's just really hard, because when you pay a running back like that, the what it represents is this guy is our number one guy, and you end up giving him so many carries that it's delirious to kind of his health and the kind of things that you want to preserve in order to make that contract worth it. So it's kind of a catch-22 to your point. Yeah,
it really is. All right, let's jump to defense real quick. The Giants have not named a defensive coordinator as of this recording. By the time it airs, maybe they will have. But odds are they're going to hire someone that blitzes less than Wink Martindale, because pretty much everybody blitzes less than Wink Martindale. So it'll be a less volatile defense from week to week with blitzing. What does your guys, say when you evaluate building a defense about blitz rate, trying to create some chaos, and how you should kind of manage that give or take when you're putting together that defensive scheme?
Yeah, I think the NFL right now prizes, a decent ratio of being able to give up first downs but not give up touchdowns. The Chiefs right now are middle of the pack. They're second best in the league in scoring defense. They're middle of the pack in series success. So they give up first downs pretty frequently, but they don't give up scores. But they're fairly aggressive. They play man defense, but against the run, they're not all that sturdy. They went out. Okirike was a big pickup. He had a great season a year ago. They got rid of Leonard Williams through a trade. Dexter Lawrence is a big money guy for them. They really need Kayvon Thibodeau to be a guy. I think blitzing oftentimes is kind of a cover up for deficiencies that you believe your roster has. So does that mean that they go out and try to get another player to pair with Thibodeau and Ojulari, somebody like that can give them pass rush without having to blitz? Do they go out and get cornerbacks to go with Banks and guys like that, because they need to be able to cover better on the backside? Blitzing to me is a risky proposition in the NFL, because there are so few possessions now in games, and if you give up big plays, the modern offense really is less powerful to come back and score on an opposing offense. So it's really playing with fire, and one of the reasons why I think the Giants struggled at times last year when they got into games with high-powered offenses like the Eagles, although they played the Eagles pretty well, but like the Cowboys, where if those big plays happen against them, their offense wasn't able to sort of turn around and answer, because most offenses aren't able to turn around and answer big play for big play. You mentioned the Cowboys, and this will be a good final stuff for a hit before we say goodbye. All I remember in these Cowboys games is them putting CeeDee Lamb in the slot, and he's just open all over the football field. And you mentioned slot corner is a position you can find now in free agency. But do you feel like that kind of slot position, which is also now kind of a star position, right? You have Brian Branch there. They need to stop the run. They need to be able to cover, do a bunch of different things. Is that position becoming more and more valuable in your eyes in the NFL, given how the best offenses like to attack the middle of the field and, frankly, put their best receivers in those slot positions so they have a two-way go? Yeah, and it's where the best defenses, a lot of times have great players, and it's also where the worst defenses fail, right? So like Los Angeles Chargers, when Derwin James gets injured, that defense where he doesn't play well because he's playing hurts, it goes kaput because he's got to do so many things. The Chiefs are so good there with Snead that he covers up, he blitzes so well, he covers number one receivers who can play inside and outside. The issue is because of the way college football is, it's so hard to find those players. It's almost always a projection. It's like Alabama might have that player, Minkah Fitzpatrick. Even he played safety in the NFL after playing slot in college. There's not that many players where you can go in and evaluate them, how they're going to play that way at a premium position. Like Mike Hilton is one random example where he played that position in college, was drafted in the 5th round, was actually pretty good in the NFL at that position. But for the most part, it's a position where you don't see a lot of guys. Brian Branch playing at Alabama with other great players having to play that kind of secondary role. That's a very rare exception. But for the most part, it's really hard to find those players because of that. These college programs play their players at the premium positions like outside corner and wide receiver. And so that's where, you truly need to trust your scouting staff and analytics to be able to sort of build that position, because it's not a straightforward build.
Yeah, same thing for middle linebacker too, right? I mean, colleges aren't producing these players anymore, and I feel like it's just really difficult, even though the salary structure is not big for that group. Middle linebacker is just a really tough spot to fill now in the league, no?
Tight ends the same way, right? Iowa, that's why Iowa produces tight ends, but they have terrible offenses in college football. It's not a position that, really translates from one to the other.
No, I'm with you. Final question, just basically trade up, trade down. If a quarterback's not involved, are you still in the always trade down, never trade up camp?
Yeah, you're just never getting a good benefit. I mean, I know there's exceptions. Trent McDuffie was a trade up and stuff like that, but you're just, especially if you're a team like the Giants, which needs talent, needs depth, trading down is almost always a positive. And it's easier said than done. You need a market for it, but it's almost always better to trade down. Even
if you think there's a blue chip guy there at 6, or would that make you hesitate a little bit?
Well, I think staying pat and taking a player is fine. It's more the don't trade, try not to trade up type of thing, more so than it's you could stay and take your player. I think trading up is oftentimes it's more expensive than the charts believe almost every time in practice, and you almost never get the value for it.
Tell the folks about your podcast, Eric, if they want to check it out.
Yep. So myself and Thomas Dimitrov, who's the CEO at Sumer Sports, the general manager of the Falcons in 2008, 2020. We record every Monday and Wednesday. Thomas brings great insight to it. We like to riff about analytics and the NFL. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. And then one thing, if anybody listening to this is interested in the Super Bowl on Sunday, we put together a 41-page big game breakdown on SumerSports.com. So filled with stats and prop bets and all that good stuff. So if anybody's interested in that, go to SumerSports.com and check out our free big game breakdown.
Eric, great conversation. We appreciate the time. Enjoy Vegas. You're early. You still look conscious and awake. Vegas hasn't gotten to you yet. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks a lot for the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Eric Eager on the Giants Huddle Podcast. We'll see you next time.
You deserve to treat yourself. So turn your tax refund into a U fund and give yourself a Straight Talk Wireless Extended Silver Unlimited plan and get a new Samsung Galaxy A14 on them. You can get a great everyday value on wireless with Straight Talk's Unlimited plan starting at $25 a line per month for 4 lines. You'll save so much you'll be enjoying that refund all year long. It's the refund that keeps on refunding. Find Straight Talk at straighttalk.com or at your local Walmart store.
Taxes and fees not included. Offer valid through 4/14/24 while supplies last. Online only. Must purchase a Straight Talk Extended Silver Unlimited plan to qualify. Limit of 5 phones per customer. Family plan discount with 4 lines, all on the Silver Unlimited plan. Not combinable with auto-pay discount.
This is where projects come to life. Our showrooms are designed to inspire with the latest products from top brands, curated in an inviting, hands-on environment, and a team of industry experts to support your project. We'll be there to make sure everything goes as planned, from product selection to delivery coordination. At Ferguson Bath, Kitchen and Lighting Gallery, your project is our priority.
Find great brands like Bosch at your local showroom or visit us online at ferguson.com/build.